The night lay quiet upon the valley of Aramor, where the air smelled faintly of pine and distant rain. High above the sleeping fields, the old stone tower stood like a sentinel of memory, its walls softened by centuries of ivy and moonlight. Within its worn stones, candles burned low, their flames trembling as though whispering ancient secrets to the breeze. It was there, upon the highest balcony, that Princess Elowen often lingered long after the court had gone to slumber. She was the daughter of a gentle king who ruled with patience, yet her heart was restless, filled with dreams too tender to share. Her world was of silken gowns, of harps and embroidery, of ladies' laughter echoing faintly down marble halls. Yet her eyes often wandered beyond the castle walls, to where the forests breathed and the stars leaned close. That evening, as the moon cast its silver blessing upon the land, Elowen stood by the balustrade, her hair unbound, catching the faint breath of the night. The sound of the crickets wove with the slow song of the river below, and for a moment she closed her eyes, feeling the quiet pulse of the world. And then, hoofbeats, soft, distant, deliberate. From her height, she saw a lone rider approaching the gate, torchlight glimmering on his armor. He was not of her father's guard, nor a herald from the neighboring realms. His banner bore the mark of the falcon, House of Eldric, a name sung once in tales of old valor. The gates opened with a creak of age, and soon the knight disappeared into the lower courtyard. Elowen lingered, her heart unexpectedly stirred. There was something about his bearing, the way he dismounted, slow and solemn, as though bowing to the silence itself. Later that night, as she passed through the old chapel corridor, she found him again. He stood by the altar, helm set aside, his face half in shadow. The candlelight touched the edges of his features, strong, thoughtful, with eyes that carried both weariness and wonder. He turned when he heard her soft step. "My lady," he said, bowing low. His voice was deep yet gentle, like a song sung beside a hearth. "You are newly come to Aramor," she replied, her words hesitant yet kind. "What brings a knight of Eldric to our quiet gates?" He smiled faintly. "Peace, my lady, only peace." He told her his name was Sir Aldrich of Eldric Hall, once a sworn sword in the service of her father's ally, yet wars had ended, and he had laid aside his blade, seeking rest from the long sorrow of battles. He had traveled far, he said, guided by the stars, and the memory of his mother's voice telling him that peace was not found in conquest, but in stillness. Elowen listened, the chapel's dim glow painting him in a tender light. She felt the gentle ache of his words echo in her own heart, for though her life was gilded, she too longed for stillness, for something true beneath the quiet weight of duty. When he departed that night, he bowed once more, and she found herself wishing he would not leave so soon. The echo of his footsteps down the stone corridor lingered long after the candles had burned low. Days turned softly into weeks, and Sir Aldrich remained within the keep. The king, pleased with his manner and noble past, granted him stewardship over the castle's falconry and defense. The birds trusted him. Creatures of fierce flight made gentle beneath his gaze. She wondered if he spoke to them, or if they simply felt what she did, that peace which lived in his soul. One morning, she ventured down to the mews under the pretense of curiosity. He turned as she entered, surprise lighting his features. "My lady," he said, bowing slightly. "I did not expect royalty among feathers and straw." Elowen laughed softly. "Nor did I, Sir Knight. Yet something told me I should see how a man of war tends such fragile hearts." He smiled then, a rare smile that touched his eyes. "They are not fragile, my lady, only misunderstood. They are born to the sky, but even the sky has tempests." His words lingered with her through the day, gentle as a prayer. From that morning forth, she found herself returning more often, sometimes bearing small gifts of fruit for the falcons, sometimes with verses of poetry she claimed to have found in old tomes. At first their meetings were guarded, bound by courtesy, but slowly, laughter began to fill the spaces between words. It was a love born not of passion's fire, but of tenderness, a warmth that seeped slowly into the bones of their hearts, quiet as falling snow. But not all hearts in Aramor slept as peacefully. Whispers began to drift among the court, of how often the princess walked beyond her tower, of the knight who bowed too deeply when she passed. The queen's ladies, curious and cautious, began to watch. One dusk, as Elowen returned from the garden, her mother awaited her in the corridor. "My daughter," said the queen, her tone kind yet knowing. "There are those who speak too freely of things best left in silence." Elowen lowered her gaze. "There is no wrong in kindness, mother." "Kindness, perhaps," the queen said, touching her cheek. "But hearts are fragile things. They do not heed the bounds of station." The princess did not answer. She could not, for she knew her mother spoke truth, and yet her heart refused to surrender the quiet joy it had found. That night, she stood again upon her balcony, the wind cool upon her face. Below, in the courtyard shadow, she saw Aldrich glance up once, before turning away into the dark. The world outside their hidden haven seemed to fade, and only the steady rhythm of their breathing remained. When he finally took her hand, he did so not as a knight to his princess, but as a man who had found something sacred. He kissed her fingers with reverence, his voice breaking the silence in a whisper. "Whatever comes, Elowen, remember this. Peace was never in crowns or swords. It was always in you." She felt tears rise unbidden, yet they were not of sorrow. "Then may we guard it together," she whispered, "for as long as the stars will allow." And so they stood beneath the arch of that old stone tower, two quiet souls keeping vigil beneath the watchful moon, their love a secret flame that neither snow nor time could quell. Outside, the bells of midnight tolled through the still air, marking another night survived by love's fragile courage. The days that followed were filled with snow and silence. Winter held the castle in a tender stillness, and all who dwelt within it moved softly, wrapped in cloaks and quiet thoughts. Only the old tower, half forgotten by time, seemed alive with warmth, for there, between stone and shadow, two hearts beat in harmony. Elowen's world had grown smaller, yet infinitely deeper. The bright chatter of courtly days no longer stirred her. It was in the quiet, in the in-between hours, that her spirit woke. She had come to know the rhythm of Aldrich's steps upon the stair, the faint creak of the door, the way his armor murmured softly like a lullaby when he knelt beside the fire. Sometimes they spoke not at all. He would mend a strap of his gauntlet or polish the edge of his sword, and she would read softly from an old book of verses, her voice floating like the smoke that curled toward the ceiling. One evening, the wind rose fierce against the tower, rattling shutters and moaning through the stones. The fire guttered low, and Elowen shivered. Aldrich rose, placing another log upon the hearth. The flame leapt again, painting him in gold and shadow. "You should not come tonight," he said gently. "The snow grows deep. It is not safe upon the stairs." She smiled faintly, drawing her cloak close. "And yet, I am here." He turned, his expression softening. "A heart so brave should have been born a knight, and yours," she replied, "should have been born a poet." He laughed then, a rare sound that filled the chamber with warmth. "Then between us, we are both misplaced in this world." When his laughter faded, silence returned, not empty, but tender, like the hush that falls before prayer. He stepped closer, his gaze deep and searching. "Elowen," he said softly, "I fear what might come if we are discovered." She looked up at him, eyes shining in the firelight. "Would you rather I had never found you?" His voice faltered. "No, I would rather risk all the world than unlearn your name." Her heart trembled. "Then let us not borrow sorrow from tomorrow." He drew her gently into his arms. There was nothing hurried, nothing desperate in their closeness, only the deep, slow peace of belonging. Outside, snow swept the night like drifting feathers, muffling the world in white. Time, it seemed, ceased to move within the tower. The candles burned low, the wind softened, and all that remained was the soft beating of two hearts and the faint crackle of flame. When at last she spoke again, her voice was a whisper. "Do you ever dream, Aldrich?" He nodded, his chin resting lightly upon her hair. "Often, of the sea of wide fields of peace that never fades. But lately, I dream only of light." "What kind of light?" "The kind that falls through your window when you smile," he said, almost shyly. She closed her eyes, holding the moment as if to keep it safe from the cold. "Then may that light never fade, my knight." For many nights more, they met in that same quiet place, their love unfolding like the slow bloom of spring beneath snow. Yet the world beyond their sanctuary did not sleep. Sir Caedmon's suspicions deepened, and whispers found their way to the Queen's ear. The castle, once peaceful, grew taut with unseen tension. Guards lingered longer in corridors. The king's gaze grew thoughtful when Aldrich's name was spoken. Still, Elowen and Aldrich did not falter. Each night became a prayer to hope itself, a defiance born not of rebellion, but of love's quiet strength. Spring came to Aramor like a sigh released after long sorrow. The snow melted from the towers and courtyards, leaving behind the scent of damp earth and the whisper of rivers freed from ice. The forest beyond the walls unfurled its green canopy once more, and the air filled with birdsong so gentle it seemed woven from joy itself. With the turning of the season, court life awakened. Banners unfurled, guests arrived, and laughter once more wandered through the halls. Yet amid all the revelry, Elowen's heart sought only the quiet places, the corners where memory lingered. The old tower, though now touched by sunlight rather than snow, remained their sanctuary. Its stones were warmer, its windows open to the breeze. There she and Aldrich met less often, for the castle no longer slept as deeply. Still, whenever chance allowed, they would steal an hour, a handful of heartbeats hidden from the world. It was on one such afternoon that Elowen found Aldrich waiting in the garden beneath the blooming apple trees. The petals drifted through the air like white rain, settling in his dark hair as he looked up at her. "My lady," he said softly, "you walk as though you were part of the wind." She smiled. "And you, sir, stand as though you are part of the earth." He laughed, a low, easy sound that warmed her more than sunlight. "Then perhaps between us, sky and soil are no longer strangers." They walked slowly through the garden paths, where the scent of blossoms mingled with the hum of bees. The world felt impossibly alive. Every sound, every color seemed to breathe with them. Yet beneath that beauty, a quiet ache stirred. For Elowen knew that such peace could not last forever. "My father speaks of alliance," she said at last, her voice careful, though her heart trembled. "A marriage, perhaps, with the son of the northern lords." Aldrich stopped walking. The breeze toyed with the petals between them, yet all else seemed still. "I had feared as much," he said gently. "I do not wish it," she continued, looking away. "I wish only—" She faltered, unable to finish. He reached out, taking her hand, not boldly, but as one might hold a fragile truth. "Do not speak what might bring you pain, my lady." It was a kiss made of silence, slow, deep, and filled with the ache of all that could not be spoken. When they parted, neither spoke. They stood together in the dim firelight, and for the first time, neither the future nor the past seemed to matter. There was only now, and the soft murmur of the wind outside the stone walls. But elsewhere in the castle, the wind carried more than whispers. The servant who had glimpsed them in the garden had gone to the steward, uncertain of what to do. Sir Caedmon listened in silence, his face unreadable. When the tale was told, he dismissed the man with a curt nod. That night, long after the hall had emptied, Caedmon climbed the same narrow stair that led to the tower. He paused at the door, listening. Within, faint voices mingled with the crackle of flame. He pushed the door open just enough to see, and his heart hardened at the sight. The princess, radiant and trusting, her hand resting upon the knight's chest. The knight, eyes closed, his lips forming her name as though it were prayer. Caedmon stepped back into shadow, his breath sharp. Nothing unworthy has passed between us. The king studied her face. In his eyes, sorrow flickered, not anger, but the weary sadness of a man who loved both his child and his crown. Love, he said softly, is the most dangerous secret a ruler's blood may keep. Tears stung her eyes. Then I am guilty, for I love him not as a princess, but as a soul loves another. The king turned away, his breath heavy. You are your mother's daughter, he murmured. Her heart once defied reason too. She reached for his hand. Please, father, he seeks no power, no favor, only peace. The king closed his eyes. Peace and love rarely dwell together beneath one roof. He rose then, his decision unspoken but clear. You will remain within your chambers for a time. I must think. When she tried to plead again, he pressed a hand to her cheek, gentle but firm. Do not make me choose between my heart and my duty. And then he was gone, leaving her alone with her tears and the ring that gleamed faintly upon her finger. That night, from her window, Elowen watched the courtyard below. Elowen's maid, gentle Mirian, often brought her letters from neighboring realms, small tokens meant to distract her. But the princess would only shake her head. There is no word from the west, she would whisper, no whisper upon the wind. For Aldrich had vanished into exile. None knew whether he rode toward the sea or into the mountains. Some said he joined a band of knights in distant service. Others whispered he had perished upon the wild roads. But Elowen believed neither. She felt him still, not as memory, but as presence, quiet and near, like a heartbeat beneath the hush of the world. Each night, before the moon reached its height, she would light a single candle at her window. It was her signal, her silent vow, that love still lived within the walls of Aramor, far beyond the kingdom's border. Aldrich rode through wild lands where the road was little more than a shadow beneath the trees. The world there was vast and untamed, rivers roaring through valleys, wolves calling from distant ridges. He lived by his sword, defending travelers and villages, earning coin enough to survive. Yet each fire he lit felt colder than the one before. Often, he would wake before dawn, the sound of her voice echoing faintly through his dreams. Wherever you wander, she had said, my heart will follow. He would stare into the fading embers and whisper into the dark, then I am never alone. Months passed. Winter came early that year, wrapping the world in snow. Aldrich found shelter in a monastery near the borderlands, where monks offered food and silence. They asked no questions, only blessed him when he left, saying, the road of the heart is longer than any exile. He rode on, through storm, through hunger, through loneliness, until one evening he reached a hill overlooking a valley of frozen streams. There he dismounted and stood watching the twilight deepen. The sky was the color of iron. The first stars glimmered faintly. From within his cloak he drew a small pendant, the ring Elowen had given him, now hanging from a cord. He pressed it to his lips, closing his eyes. Wait for me, he whispered. I will find the road home again. Until then, look to the candle at your window, for I look to its twin, lit upon my lonely road. Aldrich, her knees nearly gave way. For a long moment she could not speak. Then she pressed the letter to her chest, tears falling freely at last. He lives, she whispered. He lives, and the stars have not forgotten us. That night, the candle burned brighter than ever before, its glow reaching across the sleeping valley like a vow reborn. And though Elowen did not know it, far away, in a small cottage beside the river, another candle burned in answer, its flame trembling, steadfast, alive. The distance between them remained vast, yet the thread of their love stretched unbroken across the dark. And in that stillness, as the moon rose once more above the old tower, the world seemed to breathe again. The year turned once more, and the snows of Aldrich's exile melted into rivers of silver beneath the spring sun. Along forgotten roads he rode still, a solitary figure with a steadfast heart, carrying in his saddlebag a small pouch of coins, and in his breast a love that had not dimmed with distance. He had grown leaner, his face shadowed by travel and thought, yet his eyes, though tired, held the same quiet strength that had once drawn Elowen to him, wherever he journeyed, through bustling towns, along wild coastlines, across rolling meadows. Her memory rode beside him like a companion of light. In every place he sought no glory. He lent his sword to those in need, guarding caravans from thieves, defending farmsteads from raiders, standing vigil beside roads where no guard would tread. The common folk began to call him the Silver Knight, for they saw the glint of his blade in the moonlight and spoke of his kindness. But at night, when the fires burned low, his thoughts always returned to Aramor, to the sound of her laughter in the tower, to the ring upon his chest that carried the warmth of her hand. Sometimes, beneath starlit skies, he would take up his lute, a simple instrument he had carried since boyhood, and play the melody she had once hummed in the garden. The notes drifted into the night, soft and low, like a prayer carried by the wind. "Do you hear me still, my heart?" he would whisper to the stars. "Does the flame still burn in your window?" And though no answer came, the night itself seemed to hush in reverence, as if listening. Far away, within the old castle's quiet walls, Princess Elowen dreamed of the same melody. Often, she would wake before dawn, her cheeks damp with tears, certain she had heard the faintest strains of a lute upon the breeze. The court had grown accustomed to her solemn grace. Suitors came and went, none able to stir her heart. The princess has given her soul to prayer, some would say. Others whispered that she had been enchanted by a spirit of the woods. Only Miriam knew the truth, and guarded it like a sacred flame. "Your candle burns still," the maid said one evening as she tended the fire. "Yes," Elowen murmured, watching the glow dance across the stone, "but I fear it burns only for memory." Miriam shook her head gently. Memory is only the first step toward return. Outside, the world was waking again. Blossoms filled the orchard, and the rivers sang with thaw. Travelers brought news from distant lands, and among their tales, one rumor reached the castle gates, of a lone knight who wandered the borderlands, clad in silver and known for his mercy. Elowen heard it from a stable boy, who spoke of him with awe. "They say he fights only to defend, never to slay," the boy said, "that he rides beneath no banner but the light of the moon." Her heart stilled. She said nothing, only turned toward the window, and for the first time in many months, hope stirred like dawn behind her ribs. That night, she knelt beside her candle and whispered, "If it is truly you, my love, let the stars be our messengers." The same night, Aldrich camped by a lake whose waters mirrored the heavens. As he stared into the reflection of countless stars, one bright streak crossed the sky, swift and sudden, like an arrow of light. He smiled faintly. "Then she still watches," he murmured. Days later, his wandering brought him near a small village bordering the northern woods of Aramor, the very edge of the kingdom he had sworn never to enter again. He paused upon a hill, looking down at the familiar valley, the distant silver thread of the river, and beyond that, the faint glimmer of the castle towers through the mist. His heart ached with both joy and restraint. He had sworn upon his honor never to return. Yet how could a man's vow stand forever against the pull of the soul? He dismounted, standing upon the ridge as the wind whispered through the grass. "If I could but see her face once more," he said softly, "I would die content." That night, as he slept by the forest's edge, he dreamed of her, not in sorrow, but in peace. In his dream, she walked beside the willow once more, her gown pale, her eyes shining with forgiveness. She reached for him, and though he could not touch her, her voice was clear as the song of the wind. "The stars remember, my love. Follow their light home." When he woke, the dawn was breaking, gold through the mist, gentle and new. He rose, and without hesitation, turned his horse toward Aramor. For some promises, he knew, were not meant to be kept with words, but with courage. The path to Aramor was both familiar and strange. Aldrich rode through the same meadows where he had once trained his squires, past streams that glittered with the same light he had watched beside her. Yet time had changed everything. Even the bird song seemed older, more fragile, as if the land itself remembered what had been lost. For 3 days he traveled unseen, keeping to the wooded edges of the valley. His heart beat faster each time the distant towers of Aramor came into view, proud and gray against the sky, their spires like memories carved in stone. At dusk on the 3rd day, he reached the hill that overlooked the Silver Lake, the place where their love had been both blessed and betrayed. The willow still stood there, though its branches hung lower now, trailing in the water like fingers that longed to touch. He dismounted and knelt beside the shore. The moon's reflection trembled across the rippling surface, and for a long moment he could do nothing but breathe. "Elowen," he whispered, "do you still wait for me, as I have waited for you?" The lake gave no answer, yet the stillness itself seemed to hum with memory. He drew from his cloak the ring she had given him, the silver circle now worn smooth by years of touch. He kissed it once, and a single tear fell into the water. "I will not enter her world with deceit," he murmured. "But if fate will grant one more sight of her, only one, I will count it as grace." That night he made camp by the willow, his fire small and hidden. He slept little. Every creak of branch, every rustle of wind set his heart racing, for fear of discovery, or perhaps for fear that no one would come at all. Yet as the first light of dawn touched the lake, he saw movement upon the far bank, a figure cloaked in white, walking slowly among the reeds. At first he thought it a dream, but as the figure drew closer, the sunlight caught her hair, turning it to gold. "Elowen." His voice was a whisper that broke upon her name. She lifted her gaze, and the years between them seemed to vanish like mist. For a long moment, neither moved. Then she stepped forward, her eyes shining with tears, her voice trembling. "Aldrich, is it truly you?" He bowed his head, overcome. I dared not hope to be believed real again. When she reached him, her hand brushed his cheek, gentle, uncertain, as though touching a ghost. "You came back," she said, "after all this time." "I could not do otherwise," he replied softly. "The stars themselves would not let me rest." He smiled through her tears. "I feared you lost. I feared the wind had carried you away forever." He took her hands, holding them as though they were made of light. "Not even exile could teach my heart to forget its home." They stood beneath the willow as morning blossomed over the water. The world around them seemed to hold its breath. No birds sang, no leaves stirred. Only the gentle lap of waves broke the silence, like the soft rhythm of a heart learning once more how to beat. For a time, words felt unnecessary. The air between them was enough, filled with the unspoken stories of all the days they had lived apart. At last, Elowen spoke, her voice quiet but sure. "My father has grown old, Aldrich. The years have softened his heart, though he speaks little of the past. I do not know how he would greet you now, but I no longer wish to hide my heart in shadows." He looked at her, awe mingling with sorrow. "Would you risk his anger again?" "I have lived too long with fear," she said simply. "And love that fears the light is no love at all." He bowed his head. "Then whatever fate awaits, we face it together." They walked along the lakeshore until the sun climbed high. She spoke of the kingdom, of how peace had held, how her father's health waned, how the court whispered still but had grown weary of intrigue. Aldrich spoke of his travels, of the lands beyond the mountains, the kindness of strangers, the lessons of solitude. "You became a legend," she said softly. "The people call you the Silver Knight." He smiled faintly. "A name I never earned. I only sought to keep my promise." When the afternoon deepened, she turned toward the distant castle. "Will you come with me?" He hesitated. "To face the king." "To face the truth," she replied. Often, Elowen would glimpse him training the young squires at dawn, his movements graceful, measured, and kind. Sometimes their paths crossed by chance, the gardens, the chapel, the western tower stairs. And each time, words were few, but eyes spoke deeply. There was something in his presence that calmed her, the same peace he had spoken of. It was as though the noise of the world grew softer around him. One evening, as rain began to fall upon the castle roofs, Elowen found herself in the library, tracing her fingers over the bindings of old books. The thunder was distant, the fire low, the scent of parchment and rain filled the air. She turned, and there he was again, standing quietly by the window, watching the storm. "Does the rain trouble you, my lady?" he asked softly. She smiled, her voice nearly a whisper. "No, it soothes me. It feels as though the world is being washed clean." He nodded, eyes thoughtful. "Aye." The earth sighs in the rain, and hearts remember their gentleness. For a long moment, they stood side by side in silence. Outside, the heavens whispered their song. Within, time seemed to still. From that evening forth, something delicate began to take root between them, unspoken, yet felt in every glance, in every quiet passing. A bond that neither dared to name, yet both cherished like a secret melody carried on the wind. And so the old tower, once lonely and forgotten, began to echo again. Not with laughter or revelry, but with something deeper, softer. The whispers of two hearts slowly finding each other beneath the silver moon. The weeks that followed drifted like petals upon a slow-moving stream. Each day in Aramore carried the same tranquil rhythm, the soft clatter of hooves in the courtyard, the distant toll of chapel bells, and the tender hush of wind passing through the orchard below the tower. Amid that serenity, the bond between the princess and the knight grew quietly, like ivy along the stone. Elowen would rise early, often before the maids had drawn her curtains, to watch the mists fade over the valley. There, she would glimpse Sir Aldrich among the falcons, his hands gloved in leather, his motions calm and sure. When the autumn winds came, carrying the scent of wood smoke and fallen leaves, the castle grew quieter. The court prepared for the harvest festival, and lights twinkled in every hall. On the eve before the feast, Elowen walked alone through the garden. Lanterns hung among the hedges, and music from the great hall drifted faintly through the windows. Yet she sought not the company of dancers, but the solace of the night. There she found Aldrich beneath the old willow by the pond, his cloak drawn close against the chill. The moon shone silver upon the water, and fireflies shimmered like distant stars. "My lady," he said softly, rising, "you should be within, where warmth and merriment await." "And yet I am warmer here," she replied with a small smile. "Do you not tire of solitude?" "I have long been its companion," he answered. "It speaks kindly, if one learns to listen." She stepped closer, the hem of her gown brushing the damp grass. "And yet even solitude must sometimes ache." He looked at her then, truly looked, and for a heartbeat, the world seemed to pause. The night air hummed between them, and the moon painted his armor in quiet light. "Yes," he said at last, voice barely above a whisper. "It does." Neither spoke again for a while. The wind sighed through the willow's boughs, and the pond rippled faintly under the stars. She felt her heart tremble, yet it was not fear, only the gentle wonder of being seen. When he finally reached for her hand, he did so as though afraid to wake a dream. His touch was warm, steady, reverent, as if her fingers were something sacred. "Forgive me, my lady," he murmured. "There is nothing to forgive," she answered, "only to remember." And so they stood beneath the willow, two souls wrapped in the hush of moonlight, neither knowing whether this moment was beginning or destiny fulfilled. Days followed like verses of a poem none dared to write aloud. They spoke little of love, yet every glance told its tale. He would leave small gifts, a wild flower at her window, a feather bound with silver thread, a verse penned in his steady hand. And she in turn would linger by the training yard, or send bread still warm from her hearth to his quarters. And though no word passed between them, she felt the promise still, unbroken, unspoken, yet shining softly in the silence. The moon rose high, and the tower seemed to breathe with old memories. Within its stones, love had awakened, a love that would soon be tested, yet would never fade. Winter came quietly to Aramor, veiling the hills in soft white and stilling the river's song beneath glassy ice. Snow fell in gentle veils over the castle towers, turning their gray stone to silver beneath the pale light of dawn. Within, fires burned low and steady, and the scent of pine and beeswax filled every chamber. Princess Elowen spent her days in the warmth of the library or at her embroidery frame, though her thoughts were often elsewhere, wandering to the stables, the training yard, or the frozen garden, where footprints lingered longer than they should. Sir Aldrich was ever near yet ever distant, moving through his duties with quiet grace. To the court, he was a knight of honor. To her, he had become the still point in her heart's turning world. Their meetings, once accidental, had become a secret rhythm. In the hush between dusk and dawn, when even the servants slept and the halls lay cloaked in shadow, they would meet within the old tower where no guards kept watch. It was a forgotten place, a relic of older times, where the stones still held the warmth of ancient candles and the whisper of vows long past. There, by the flicker of firelight, they would speak softly, their voices low as if afraid to wake the past. "Do you ever long for your home?" Elowen asked one night, tracing the rim of a pewter cup between her fingers. Aldrich smiled faintly. "Eldrick Hall was my father's pride, but it holds only ghosts now. The walls remember too many battles. Here, I find more peace among silence than ever I found among kin." "And yet," she said, her gaze meeting his, "you must miss the freedom of the open world." He looked toward the narrow window where snowflakes drifted like dreams. "The world beyond is vast, my lady, yet it feels empty without purpose. Here, in this stillness, I find reason enough to stay." She felt her breath catch, for though he spoke no word of love, it lived between them, glowing softly like the hearth. Sometimes he would tell her of distant lands, of the forests of Dareth where deer moved like shadows, of the misty shores of Rin where bells were said to ring beneath the sea. She would listen, her head resting lightly upon her hand, eyes filled with quiet wonder, and in turn she would tell him stories of her childhood, how she used to sneak from her chambers to watch the stars, or how her nurse would speak of fair spirits that guarded lonely hearts. They shared their worlds in fragments, as though weaving a tapestry from memory and longing. But even in the warmth of that secret refuge, shadows stirred. The steward of the castle, Sir Caedmon, had begun to notice the late hours kept by the night. He was a stern man, loyal to the king yet suspicious of joy. To him, peace was order, and love, a dangerous fire. One evening as Aldrich left the tower, cloak drawn tight, Caedmon met him upon the stair. "You walk late, Sir Aldrich," the steward said, his tone measured. "The king's court sleeps while you wander." Aldrich inclined his head calmly. "The night is kind company, my lord. It keeps my thoughts in quiet." Caedmon's eyes narrowed. "See that your thoughts remain your own. Whispers have wings in these halls." The knight said nothing more, but his jaw tightened. That night, as he met Elowen in the tower once more, he told her of the exchange. She frowned, her fingers clutching her cloak. "He suspects?" "Perhaps," Aldrich said softly, "but suspicion dies in silence. We must be cautious, my lady." She gazed up at him, her voice trembling like candle flame. "I cannot bear to lose these moments." He reached out, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "Nor I," he said, "but love must sometimes walk softly to survive." The fire crackled low, and snow pressed against the window panes like ghostly hands. Outside, the wind carried the scent of pine and the faint cry of an owl. Within that ancient tower, they stood close, two hearts bound by secrecy, yet glowing with the quiet courage of those who know the worth of tenderness. At times, when words failed them, they would simply listen. One dawn, after a long snow, Aldrich stood upon the battlements watching the sun rise over the valley. The sky blushed faintly, painting the frost with gold. He heard footsteps behind him, soft, cautious. Elowen approached, her cloak drawn close, her breath misting in the cold. "You should not be here," he whispered. Though his voice lacked conviction, she smiled gently. "And yet I am, for even dawn feels lonely without you." He turned toward her, the morning light catching in his eyes. "Elowen," he said, her name a vow. In that instant, beneath the awakening sun, they stood together, no longer princess and knight, but simply two souls who had found their home in one another. The castle stirred below, but up there, in the pure hush of dawn, time belonged to them. He kissed her brow, a silent promise that no matter what storm might come, the peace they had found would endure, if not in life, then in memory, where love is never bound by fear. And as the first bells of morning tolled, the snow began to fall again, softly, endlessly, like a benediction upon the secret hearts of Aramor. The heart knows what it must, even when the world does not permit it. Her eyes lifted to his. "And what of your heart, Aldrich? What does it permit?" He smiled faintly, though sorrow shadowed the corners of his mouth. "It permits only what it cannot deny." Silence fell between them, filled with birdsong and the scent of flowers. She wished the moment could stretch forever, suspended in the golden air. Finally, Aldrich drew a small token from his belt, a simple silver ring, unadorned but beautifully made. "This was my mother's," he said. "She told me it was meant to remind the heart of constancy. Take it, Elowen, not as promise of defiance, but as truth." Her fingers trembled as he placed it upon her hand. The metal was cool, but it warmed quickly against her skin. "I will wear it always," she whispered. Then, as though the world itself conspired to bless them, a soft rain began to fall, the kind that does not chill but soothes. They did not seek shelter. Instead, they stood together beneath the apple trees, the rain glimmering upon their hair and lashes, the petals clinging to their clothes. He looked at her with a tenderness too deep for words. "If I could build you a world," he murmured, "it would be made of evenings such as this. And I," she said, "would fill it with songs of peace." The rain softened, and the air grew fragrant with wet blossoms. For a moment, they felt the weight of nothing, not duty, not fear, not time, only the quiet certainty that their souls had found what they were born to seek. But beyond the garden walls, unseen eyes watched. A servant, moving through the orchard to gather herbs, paused at the sight of them. He saw the ring, the closeness, the way the knight's hand lingered upon the princess's cheek. His breath caught, not out of malice but of shock. And then he turned away, his steps hurried. Neither Elowen nor Aldrich knew that their secret had begun to unfurl beyond their keeping. As dusk approached, they parted beneath the arch of roses that crowned the garden path. She turned back once, her gown brushing through the blossoms. He watched her go until the last glimmer of her figure disappeared beyond the gate, and then he knelt, pressing his palm into the earth as if to anchor himself. "Let this love be my prayer," he whispered to the silent trees. "Let it be my peace, whatever may come." Above him, the petals fell, soft, endless, like blessings from the heavens. That evening, the castle shone with lanterns. Musicians played in the great hall, their lutes and flutes weaving a tapestry of mirth. Servants hurried through corridors bearing trays of wine and roasted meat, while nobles gathered beneath banners newly embroidered for the season. But within all that brightness, Princess Elowen felt a quiet weight upon her heart. She sat beside her mother at the high table, her smile dutiful, her laughter soft and measured. Across the room, she saw Sir Aldrich standing with the other knights, his armor polished, his expression calm. Yet when their eyes met, something flickered, not longing but warning. His gaze lingered only for a breath before he turned away, as though afraid even a glance might betray them. Elowen's thoughts turned to the ring upon her finger, now hidden beneath her sleeve. It seemed to hum with its own life, a secret heartbeat against her skin. The feast carried on, songs of valor, the clatter of goblets, the scent of wine and roses, but she felt the walls closing around her. She longed for the quiet of the tower, for candlelight and whispered laughter, for the peace that only Aldrich's presence could bring. When the music slowed and the guests began to dance, she excused herself quietly. Her mother, caught in conversation, merely nodded. Ellen slipped through the side door into the cool corridors beyond. The castle seemed a different world in silence. Torches burned low, and the faint echo of her steps mingled with the sigh of wind from the courtyard. She drew her cloak close, her heart already guiding her feet. In the shadow of the western stair, Aldrich waited. He stepped from the dimness, his eyes soft with both joy and caution. "My lady," he whispered, bowing low. "My knight," she answered, unable to keep the warmth from her voice. "How I have missed the sound of quiet." He smiled faintly. "The court is loud enough to drown 1,000 hearts." They moved together down the narrow passage that led to the old tower. The air smelled faintly of rain, and the moonlight slanted through the high windows like silver threads. When they reached the familiar chamber, the world seemed to exhale. The fire still held a faint glow from earlier, as though it too had been waiting. Eowyn removed her cloak, her gown catching the light like flowing water. Aldrich watched her in silence, his heart aching with both reverence and restraint. "Sometimes I wonder," she said softly, "if the world beyond these walls still exists." "It does," he murmured, "but none of it feels as real as this." She turned toward him, her expression tender. "Would that we could stay here always, between heartbeats, between seasons." He stepped closer, and for a moment it seemed he might take her in his arms, but he stopped, his hands trembling slightly. "I forget honor for a heartbeat," he said. "It is not for lack of faith, but because you have made faith itself seem small beside love." Her breath caught, and yet love asks nothing but truth. Their lips met then, not with haste, but as though the world itself had waited for the moment. To him it was betrayal, of rank, of order, of peace itself. He turned swiftly, the echo of his steps lost to the rising wind. Within the tower, Eowyn and Aldrich remained unaware. The fire dimmed, and she leaned against him, her head resting upon his shoulder. "Promise me," she whispered, "that no matter what may come, you will not vanish without a word." He touched her hair, his voice steady though his heart trembled. "I promise. Wherever there is light, my heart will find you." Outside, the moon hid behind gathering clouds. The garden slept. But the silence that had sheltered their love had begun to break, and beyond the horizon, change was already stirring, soft as dawn, and just as inevitable. Morning came pale and still, with mist coiling around the towers like the breath of forgotten ghosts. Aramore's bells tolled softly across the valley, summoning knights and servants to their duties. Yet within the old tower, the embers still glowed faintly from the night before, the last witness to the secret that had bloomed in darkness. Sir Aldrich rose before dawn, as he always did. His armor lay beside the hearth, glinting faintly in the dim light. He moved quietly, careful not to wake the slumbering castle, though his heart carried a heaviness he could not shake. The memory of Eowyn's touch, her voice whispering promises into the night, lingered like a blessing and a burden, both. He stepped into the courtyard, the morning air sharp with cold. The world was still half asleep, only the ravens stirred upon the battlements. He turned toward the stables, intending to ride out to the edge of the woods, to clear his thoughts before the day began. But as he reached for his reins, he felt a presence behind him. Sir Aldrich. The voice was flat, hard, unmistakable. He turned to find Sir Caedmon, the steward of Aramore, standing in the half-light. His cloak was dark with dew, his expression carved from stone. "My lord," Aldrich greeted, keeping his tone respectful. Caedmon's eyes narrowed. "You rise early. A habit of old campaigns, no doubt." "A habit of reflection," Aldrich replied quietly. The steward stepped closer. "Reflection can be dangerous when it hides something deeper." Aldrich's hand tightened on the reins, but his gaze remained calm. "If you have accusations, speak it plain." "I have no accusations," Caedmon said, his voice colder now. "Only concern. The princess walks more often than she should. The guards whisper of her meetings, of a certain knight whose honor is spoken of too kindly." Aldrich's heart steadied itself. "Rumor is a poor mirror of truth." "Perhaps," said Caedmon, his eyes like flint. "But the king listens even to whispers when they concern his only child." For a moment, neither man spoke. The silence between them was taut as a drawn bowstring. Then Caedmon turned away, his cloak sweeping through the mist. "Be careful where you walk, Sir Aldrich. The higher the tower, the longer the fall." When he was gone, Aldrich exhaled slowly. His hands trembled, not from fear but from the certainty that the walls around their secret were closing in. Later that morning, as the sun pierced through the haze, Elowen sat in her chamber, her hands still upon the embroidery she no longer cared to finish. She had dreamed of Aldrich, of the promise he had spoken, and awoke with a strange unease. When her maid entered bearing a summons from her father, her heart stilled. The king awaited her in the council chamber, a tall, quiet man whose hair had turned silver but whose eyes still carried the weight of command. "My daughter," he said, motioning her forward. "Come sit beside me." She obeyed, her fingers cold against the folds of her gown. "I hear troubling whispers," he began, "of walks taken beyond the gardens, of time spent in places unbefitting a princess of Aramor." Her throat tightened. "Father, He raised a hand, silencing her. "I do not wish to believe idle talk, yet I must guard your name and the peace of my realm. Sir Caedmon has spoken of a knight whose presence grows too near your shadow. Is this true?" For a heartbeat she could not speak. The truth burned in her chest, but to speak it would be to condemn them both. And yet, to lie was a sin her heart could not bear. Her voice trembled. "He is noble of spirit, Father." The torches burned low, and somewhere beyond the walls, she thought she saw movement. A lone figure walking beneath the stars, slow and heavy-hearted. It was Aldrich, she knew. And though no word could reach him, she whispered into the night, "Whatever comes, I am yours." The next day dawned with a silence that did not feel like peace. The castle of Aramor, usually alive with laughter and the clang of steel, seemed veiled beneath some unseen sorrow. The maids spoke in whispers, and even the banners above the courtyard hung heavy in the still air. Sir Aldrich trained his men upon the green, his sword flashing in the pale light, yet his thoughts were far from battle. His every motion felt hollow, his heart tethered to a window high above, behind which he knew she waited. When the session ended, and the younger knights departed to the armory, Aldrich remained. He turned toward the old path leading to the tower, but stopped short. 2 guards stood there now, newly stationed. His pulse faltered. The king had already moved to enforce his distance. For a long moment, Aldrich stood in the courtyard, watching the stone tower rise against the sky. He thought of the laughter that once filled that chamber, of the scent of candles and the warmth of her hands. The air felt colder now, as though even the wind mourned their separation. Sir Aldrich. He turned. It was Lady Mirian, one of the Queen's attendants, and Elowen's confidant. Her eyes darted around before she stepped close, pressing a folded scrap of parchment into his gloved hand. "She asked me to bring this," she whispered. "No one must see." Before he could answer, she slipped away down the corridor. Aldrich's heart pounded as he unfolded the letter. "My beloved, my father's heart is torn. I am kept within my chambers, watched day and night. Yet my love is unchanged. If you still hold our promise, meet me when the moon climbs high, beneath the willow by the silver lake. There, no eyes shall follow us." Elowen, he read it twice, each word sinking deep like an arrow made of longing. He burned the letter upon the brazier in his chamber, watching the ink curl into smoke, then prepared himself for the night. When darkness came, the castle slept beneath a shroud of rain. The wind whispered along the battlements, and the torches sputtered weakly in the damp. Aldrich wrapped himself in a cloak, leaving his armor behind. He moved with the stealth of a shadow, his boots silent upon the stones. Beyond the walls, the forest breathed with mist. The path to the lake wound through groves of elm and fern, and the scent of rain-soaked earth filled the air. By the time he reached the willow's edge, the moon had risen, a pale, trembling lantern in the sky. Elowen stood waiting beneath the drooping branches, her cloak drawn close. When she saw him, she exhaled a sound that was half sob, half laughter. Aldrich. He caught her in his arms, holding her as though the world itself might crumble if he let go. "You should not have come," he murmured. "I could not bear the walls," she whispered. "I dreamed of your voice and woke to silence." He brushed the rain from her hair. "They will find us if we linger." "Then let them," she said softly, defiant tears in her eyes. "What is love if it must always hide?" He smiled faintly. "It is love still, but it suffers for its beauty." For a time, they stood together beneath the willow, the rain whispering around them. It was a fragile peace, stolen, fleeting, yet it was more real than the stone halls they had left behind. Elowen rested her head upon his chest, listening to the slow rhythm of his heart. "If they should part us, promise me you will not fade into the dark," she said. He tilted her chin upward, meeting her gaze. "I will not fade, my lady. Even should the seas part us, I would cross the world to hear your name again." Her lips trembled into a smile. "You speak like a poet, not a knight. I am only a man who has forgotten how to fight anything but longing." The moon broke through the clouds then, casting silver upon the lake. They stood wrapped in its light, their reflections trembling upon the water like a vision too tender to belong to the waking world. For a moment, time held its breath. Then, a sound, a distant shout, the crack of a branch beneath heavy boots. Elowen's fingers tightened upon his sleeve. "They followed us." Aldrich turned toward the trees, his hand instinctively reaching for the sword he had not brought. From the darkness, torchlight flickered. 3 men, guards of Aramor, with Sir Caedmon at their head. "Princess Elowen!" Caedmon's voice rang across the lake. "You shame your father's house." Aldrich stepped before her. "This is no shame, my lord," he said evenly. "Only love, and love is not treason." "Love?" Caedmon spat the word. "Love is the ruin of kingdoms." The guards drew closer. Elowen clutched Aldrich's arm. "Please," she begged, "do not harm him." Caedmon's eyes softened for a breath, then hardened again. "No harm," he said quietly, "but you will not meet again." He gestured sharply, and one of the guards stepped forward, seizing Aldrich by the arm. The knight did not resist. His gaze never left Elowen's. "Do not fear," he told her, his voice calm even as they dragged him back toward the road. "Whatever comes, remember, my love is steadfast." Her cry echoed across the water, mingling with the wind and rain. When they were gone, she sank to her knees beside the willow, the silver moonlight trembling upon her tears. Above the hills, dawn waited, pale, uncertain, and far too soon. The morning after Aldrich's capture broke with no birdsong. The sky lay heavy with clouds, and the castle of Aramor seemed to hold its breath. The great courtyard, once a place of laughter and training, was now lined with guards. In its center stood Sir Aldrich, bound but unbowed, his wrists encircled by iron, his gaze steady upon the horizon. The king sat upon the high steps of the hall, his crown dimmed by sorrow. To his right stood Sir Caedmon, arms folded, eyes cold with duty. The princess was not permitted to attend. Her cries the night before had echoed through every corridor until dawn. The herald's voice rang out, clear and formal. "Sir Aldrich of the Western March, knight sworn to his majesty of Aramor, stands accused of conduct unbecoming his station, of secret meetings with her highness, the Princess Elowen, and of defiance of royal order." A murmur rippled through the gathered knights. Aldrich bowed his head, not in shame, but in calm acceptance. The king rose slowly. "Sir Aldrich," he said, his voice weary but not cruel, "you have served this house with loyalty. Your valor is known throughout the realm. Yet a knight's heart must be bound by honor, not by passion. You stand accused of breaking the sacred divide between crown and sword. What have you to say?" Aldrich lifted his gaze to the king. "Your Majesty," he said, his voice clear though quiet, "I have broken no vow that my soul regrets. My love for your daughter was born not of ambition, but of truth. I sought no crown, no favor, only the peace found in her presence." The king's eyes softened, though his hand clenched at his side. "Peace found in defiance is no peace at all. I would have lived and died by your command," Aldrich continued, "but I could not command my heart. If that be a crime, I stand guilty." There was a long silence. The courtiers whispered, but the king's expression was unreadable. Then, from behind the columns, a voice broke through, trembling yet strong. "Then I am guilty as well." The crowd turned. Elowen stood in the doorway, her hair unbound, her gown pale as dawn. Guards moved to stop her, but she brushed past them with the grace of one who had already accepted her fate. "Father," she said, approaching the dais, "you cannot judge him without judging me. It was I who called him to the lake. I who spoke the first word of love. If there is punishment, let it fall upon me." The king closed his eyes. For a moment he looked less like a monarch and more like a man crushed beneath the weight of two hearts. "Elowen," he murmured, "you know not what you ask. I know only that to see him suffer is a wound I cannot bear." Her voice cracked then, but she did not weep. The king descended from his seat, standing before both of them. "Love," he said quietly, "is a noble thing, but kingdoms are built upon law. I cannot condone your union, nor can I allow it to destroy the peace of my realm." He turned to Aldrich. "You will not be executed. Your deeds in battle have earned you that mercy. Instead, you shall be exiled from Aramor. You are to depart by sunset, and never again set foot within these walls." Elowen's breath caught. "Exile? It is mercy," the king said, his voice breaking. "The only mercy I have left to give." The guards moved forward. Aldrich bowed his head once more, then lifted his gaze to the princess. His eyes filled with both sorrow and unspoken vows. He spoke softly, so only she could hear. "Do not grieve my heart. Exile cannot banish love." They led him away through the courtyard gates. Elowen followed until the guards blocked her path. Her tears fell freely now, but she lifted her chin, refusing to look away until he was gone from sight. As the gates closed behind him, the wind rose, carrying with it the distant roll of thunder. The storm that had been waiting at the edges of their world had finally arrived. That night, the castle seemed hollow. The king walked the corridors alone, haunted by his choice, and in her chamber, Elowen knelt by the window, the ring upon her finger glinting faintly in the candlelight. She whispered into the emptiness, "Wherever you wander, my heart will follow." Far beyond the walls, Sir Aldrich rode through the forest beneath a weeping sky. Each hoofbeat struck the earth like a farewell. The road stretched endless before him, a path to nowhere, yet he carried within him a quiet certainty. Love had not been destroyed, only tested. He paused once upon a hill, turning to look back. The castle was a faint shadow against the clouds, the highest tower gleaming faintly with light. "Sleep well, my lady," he murmured, and rode on into the mist. The days that followed were long and hollow, as though time itself had lost its warmth. Rain fell without end, turning the fields of Aramor to mirrors of gray water. In her chamber, Princess Elowen sat by the window from dawn until dusk, her embroidery forgotten, her eyes tracing the distant forest where her heart had vanished. No laughter rose from the great hall now. Even the servants moved softly, for sorrow lay over the castle like a heavy veil. The king seldom spoke. He spent his evenings walking the ramparts, his thoughts a storm that no counsel could quiet. Back in Aramor, spring began to stir at last. The ice melted from the eaves, and the air carried the scent of thawing earth. Yet for Eowyn, the season brought little joy. The court had resumed its duties, and her father, though kinder than before, had begun to speak of alliances, of suitors and treaties, of what was best for the realm. She listened in silence, her hands folded in her lap. Her eyes, however, drifted often toward the window, where sunlight fell across the stone like a memory of warmth. One evening, as she walked the gardens alone, she found Lady Mirian waiting beside the willow, the same willow that had once hidden their vows. "My lady," Mirian whispered, glancing about. "A traveler came to the gate this morn. He brought this." She held out a small piece of parchment, folded and sealed with no crest. Eowyn's heart leapt. Her fingers trembled as she broke it open. "My dearest, I live, though far from the light of Aramor. The road is long, yet every mile I walk draws me nearer to you in spirit. If fate is kind, I will return when the blossoms rise again." He gazed upon her, and in her eyes he saw not the young princess of his memory, but a woman shaped by time, by courage, by love that had endured the storm. "Yes," he said at last, "I will come." They mounted his horse together, the same creature that had carried him into exile, and now carried him home. As they rode up the winding path toward Aramor, the sun burned gold behind them, casting their shadows long across the hills. The guards at the gate stared in disbelief, but did not raise their spears. Perhaps the years had taught even them that some vows are older than fear. And as the great doors opened, Aldrich felt the weight of the past lift from his heart. The long road was ending, though what awaited beyond those walls neither could yet know. But for the first time in many years, hope rode beside them. The heavy oak doors of Castle Aramor creaked open as Aldrich and Eowyn entered the great hall. The vast chamber lay steeped in the golden hush of late afternoon. Dust motes drifted through shafts of sunlight that fell upon faded banners, the colors of old battles dimmed by time. The echoes of their footsteps lingered like faint heartbeats across the stone. It had been 10 long years since Aldrich had last crossed this threshold. The air smelled of wax, old wood, and memory. Every corner whispered of things left unsaid. The laughter of squires in the courtyard, the solemn oaths sworn before dawn, the music that had once drifted from the tower where love had quietly bloomed. Now, the same hall stood quieter, gentler, like an old man remembering his youth. Servants watched from the edges, wide-eyed. Some whispered his name, "The night returns," while others crossed themselves as if seeing a ghost. But none moved to stop him. At Eowyn's side, Aldrich walked slowly, his armor dulled by years but his bearing proud. He had no banner to bear, no weapon to boast of, only the truth of his love, the weight of his years, and the calm strength of one who had nothing left to prove. They reached the dais at the far end of the hall. There, upon the high seat, sat King Edric, older now, his once dark hair streaked with silver, his eyes weary but not unkind. A fur-lined cloak hung about his shoulders, and his crown rested lightly upon his brow, as though it too had grown tired of rule. For a long moment he said nothing. His gaze swept over Aldrich, taking in the scars, the travel-worn cloak, the silver ring glinting faintly in his hand. Then his eyes moved to his daughter. "Eowyn," he said at last, his voice low, lined with age. "Why have you brought this man back into my hall?" The question was not cruel but heavy, filled with memory and consequence. Eowyn stepped forward, her voice steady. "Because my heart has never forgotten him, father, and because there is peace to be made, if we still believe in such things." The king regarded her, his hands resting upon the arms of his throne. "Peace, you say? Do you know how much grief his disobedience once brought this court? How many sleepless nights, how many whispers of betrayal?" Aldrich bowed his head. "I know, your grace, and I carry that weight still." The king's eyes narrowed slightly. "Then why return?" "To lay that burden down," Aldrich said quietly. "I have lived these years in exile, not as punishment alone, but as reflection. I have seen kingdoms rise and fall, lords undone by pride, and hearts made whole only by forgiveness. I seek not your favor nor my title. I seek only to stand before you in truth." For a time, there was silence. The king studied him, as though searching for deceit and finding none. Elowen stepped closer, kneeling beside her father's seat. "He has been a ghost in my heart, Father. All these years I have prayed not for his return in glory, but in peace. If there is mercy left in this world, let it begin here, in this hall, where all things began." Her words hung in the air like incense. Even the servants seemed to hold their breath. King Edric's hand trembled slightly upon the armrest. His eyes grew distant, as if looking back across the years, to the young knight who had once sworn him loyalty, to the daughter who had once danced in the moonlight without care, to all the mistakes born of fear and pride. "Rise, child," he said softly. She obeyed, standing tall, her gaze unwavering. Then the king turned to Aldrich once more. "You would swear again, if I asked it? Swear not as a knight seeking favor, but as a man seeking peace?" Aldrich met his eyes. "Gladly, my lord." "Then kneel," said the king. Aldrich did so. The old man's voice, though weakened by time, still carried the weight of a ruler's heart. "Do you swear by the stars above and the earth beneath, that your love for my daughter shall bring no ruin to this house, no shame to her name, no strife to her soul?" "I swear it," Aldrich replied, his voice steady and clear. The king leaned forward, studying his face for the briefest flicker of doubt. Finding none, he sighed, long and deep, as though exhaling a decade of regret. "Then rise, Aldrich of Cerwyn. Once I called you my knight. Today I call you my son." A soft murmur spread through the hall. Elowen's breath caught. Tears welled in her eyes. Aldrich rose slowly, disbelief mingling with reverence. The king's hand trembled as he lifted it, but his smile, though faint, was true. "May peace dwell at last in this house," he said. Then, turning to his daughter, he added gently, "You have waited long enough, child. The tower no longer needs to be your prison." Elowen bowed her head, tears glimmering like pearls upon her cheeks. In that moment, the sunlight shifted through the high windows, bathing them all in gold. The years of exile and sorrow seemed to melt away, not forgotten but forgiven, absorbed into the stillness of the hall like rain into thirsty earth. Aldrich turned to Elowen and took her hand. "At last, the long road ends," he whispered. "No," she replied softly, smiling through her tears. "It only begins again, together." That night, the castle was alive with quiet wonder. No trumpet sounded, no feast was proclaimed, yet a sense of renewal stirred in every corridor, like spring rising after a long winter. Servants lit fresh candles in the halls, their flames reflecting off the old stone walls, and the scent of honeyed wax mingled with the soft notes of a distant lute. Elowen walked beside Aldrich through the corridors, where once they had stolen glances in passing, their secret affection hidden from the world. Now, though older and changed by time, they walked openly, side by side, the air between them no longer heavy with fear. They paused before the stairway leading to the old tower. It stood silent, its stones cloaked in ivy, its windows glinting faintly beneath the starlit sky. "It has not changed," Aldrich said quietly. Elowen smiled, tracing her fingers along the weathered stone. "No, only we have." She led him up the spiral steps, the echo of their footsteps soft against the ancient floor. When they reached the top chamber, Aldrich felt his breath catch. Everything was as it had been. The small hearth, the carved wooden chair by the window, the table where she had once written her letters and poems. The candle still stood upon the sill, though its wax had long hardened, its wick untouched for years. Elowen crossed to it, striking a small flame from the taper she carried. As the wick caught light, the room glowed in golden warmth once more. "I kept it here," she said softly, "so that if ever you returned, you would not find this place dark." Aldrich's voice was thick with feeling. "You kept the flame alive even when hope must have felt like madness." She turned toward him, her eyes luminous in the candlelight. Hope, she said, is love's quiet faith. It does not shout or demand, it waits. He stepped closer, his gaze fixed upon her. And I have wandered 1,000 roads to find the way back to that light. They stood together by the window, the moon rising beyond the hills, silvering the lake far below. From that high vantage, the world seemed peaceful, the forest dark and still, the air scented with heather and night blossoms. Elowen leaned her head against his shoulder. I used to dream that one day I would stand here again and hear your voice. But dreams fade. Tonight feels more like remembering than living. And let us remember, Aldrich murmured, until memory itself becomes life again. For a long while, they said nothing more. The candle burned steadily, and the night wrapped around them like a gentle cloak. Later, they descended once more to the great hall, where King Edric awaited them beside the hearth. His face was drawn with weariness, yet a quiet contentment had softened his features. I have thought much this night, he said as they approached, and I see now that my own pride was the cruelest exile of all. What was once forbidden by fear may now be blessed by wisdom. He gestured for them to kneel, and when they did, he laid his trembling hands upon their heads. Let love rule where pride once stood, he said. Let peace dwell where silence long endured. Before the eyes of the heavens and of this house, I give my blessing. Elowen's tears fell freely. Aldrich bowed his head, his throat too tight for words. When they rose, the king smiled faintly. Go then, not as knight and princess, but as two souls joined by grace. The land has need of hearts like yours, for mercy rules longer than might. They bowed deeply, and as they withdrew, the old man's gaze followed them with something like relief, as if a lifelong burden had at last been set down. In the courtyard, the moon shone high, casting the stones in a soft argent glow. The guards stood aside, watching in reverent silence as the pair stepped into the night air. Elowen turned to Aldrich. Do you remember our promise? Beneath the willow, he smiled, the years melting from his face. I remember every word. Then let us keep it, she whispered. They walked together down toward the lake, hand in hand. The path was lined with wildflowers and bathed in silver light. The willow's branches swayed gently above the still water, and the stars reflected there seemed brighter than ever, as if they too rejoiced in reunion. Aldrich stopped beneath the willow and took her face in his hands. For all the time lost, he said, I would not trade what we have now. For it was through loss that I learned how deeply love roots itself. Elowen smiled through her tears, and through waiting I learned that time cannot dim what is eternal. Their foreheads touched, and the world seemed to fall silent. Only the whisper of the leaves and the soft ripple of water broke the stillness. The candle in her tower burned through the night, its light glimmering upon the lake below, a beacon not of longing now, but of fulfillment. And as dawn approached, spreading pale gold over the valley, Aldrich and Elowen stood together in the hush of the worlds, waking, hearts steady, the promise of peace finally kept. Morning came softly to Castle Aramor. Sunlight poured through tall, arched windows, filling the halls with a golden calm that seemed almost sacred. The air carried the scent of wildflowers from the gardens below, and the distant murmur of the silver lake, its surface gleaming like a mirror to the heavens. For the first time in many years, Aldrich awoke not to the lonely call of distant crows, or the rustle of his cloak against cold ground, but to the steady hush of home, the small chamber given to him, once the quarters of the captain of the guard, opened onto the eastern courtyard. From his bed, he could see Elowen walking among the morning blossoms, her gown brushing dew from the grass. She looked up and smiled when she saw him at the window, and that single gesture filled him with more warmth than the rising sun. Later, as they met in the garden, she placed a small wreath of lavender in his hands. A token, she said, for peace long awaited. He bowed slightly, inhaling its fragrance. And long cherished, he replied. The years that followed were gentle ones, the kind that pass quietly, like pages in a beloved book. Aldrich remained within Ormor's walls, no longer a knight of battle but a guardian of its people. He taught the young squires not only the art of swordplay but the virtue of restraint. A blade, he would tell them, is worth little without the heart that guides it. Under his guidance, the training fields became places not of harsh discipline, but of quiet strength. He encouraged laughter, kindness, and respect for all who served, for he knew now that true valor was not measured by conquest, but by compassion. Eowyn, meanwhile, devoted herself to the healing halls of the castle. The years apart had deepened her gentleness. She tended to the sick and the weary, her presence a balm to all who entered. The villagers came to call her the Light of Aramor, for wherever she walked, calm seemed to follow. At times, she and Aldrich would meet beneath the willow by the lake, not in secrecy now, but in peace. They would sit together as evening fell, their hands entwined, speaking softly of the day's quiet labors. One such evening, Aldrich said, "I have spent half my life seeking forgiveness, and now that I have found it, I find I seek only stillness." Eowyn smiled faintly. "Then we are both pilgrims who have reached the same chapel, the one built not of stone, but of time." He looked at her, his eyes tender. "And what prayer do we offer there?" "The prayer of contentment," she whispered. They sat in silence then, the wind sighing through the branches. Fireflies began to shimmer above the water, tiny lanterns in the gathering dusk. As the seasons turned, peace deepened across the land. The wars that had once haunted the borders faded into memory. Trade returned, music once again filled the marketplace, and laughter echoed in the castle halls. King Edric, though frail, lived to see his realm at harmony. Often, he would summon Aldrich and Eowyn to sit beside him by the fire. "You have both taught me more than a lifetime of rule," he would say, his eyes misty. "Love, I see now, governs better than fear." When he passed one winter night, his departure was serene. Eowyn wept beside him, holding his hand until the last, while Aldrich stood silently at the foot of the bed, his head bowed. The following spring, bells rang through Aramor, not for mourning, but for renewal. The council, with one voice, named Eowyn queen. Aldrich knelt before her as the crown was placed upon her brow, though she smiled and said softly, "You have knelt enough in this life, my heart. Rise and stand beside me." And so he did, not as a knight, not as a lord, but as her companion in rule and in love. Together they governed wisely, their reign marked not by conquest, but by care. In the evenings, when court duties ended and torches burned low, they would walk the ramparts hand in hand. The stars above seemed closer then, the night gentler. "I once thought love was fire," Aldrich murmured one such night, "something that consumes. And now?" she asked. "Now I know it is water," he said. "It shapes, it endures, it soothes the world." Eowyn leaned against him, her voice a whisper against the breeze, then let it flow, until even the stones remember. And so it did. Their story, once marked by secrecy and sorrow, became a quiet legend, told in soft voices beside hearths, carried in song by travelers. Children of Aramor grew up believing that beneath the willow by the silver lake, if one listened closely, they could hear the gentle murmur of eternal vows. And though the years would one day turn their hair silver and their steps slower, Aldrich and Eowyn never ceased to walk the same path, together, beneath the same moon that had witnessed their first promise. The seasons in Aramor flowed like a gentle river, unhurried and serene. Each spring unfurled its blossoms across the meadows, each autumn cloaked the hills in amber, and the kingdom thrived beneath the quiet rule of its queen and her steadfast knight. In the mornings, the castle stirred with life, children chasing sparrows through the courtyards, traders calling out their wares at the gates, the ring of hammers from the blacksmith's forge blending with the laughter of villagers. All of it carried the soft rhythm of a land at peace. From her window, Queen Eowyn often watched the life she had once only dreamed of preserving. The people loved her, not as a distant monarch, but as one of their own. They brought her flowers in spring and lanterns in winter, They sang songs of gratitude beneath her balcony at harvest time. Yet even amidst her duties, she never lost the tenderness of heart that had first drawn Aldrich to her. She still walked through the healing halls, tending the sick, comforting the weary. Often, she would pause at a bedside and murmur a prayer, not for miracles, but for rest, for ease, for light. And always at her side or never far away was Aldrich. He spent his days training the next generation of knights, instilling in them the virtues he had learned through both loss and love. "Remember," he would say, as he guided a young squire's hand upon the hilt, "a sword is but the echo of the soul that wields it. If your heart is kind, your blade will never bring harm where mercy might suffice." In the evenings, he walked the castle grounds with Elowen. They would pause beneath the old willow, now grown broader and more graceful with age, and there they would speak of their youth, not with longing, but with gratitude. One evening, as twilight deepened into indigo, Elowen said softly, "Do you ever think of what might have been had we defied my father all those years ago?" Aldrich smiled faintly, watching fireflies flicker along the water. "Sometimes. But I believe our love would not have ripened had it not endured the storm. The waiting shaped us, gave us patience, gentleness, and strength." She nodded, her gaze tender. Yes, perhaps even sorrow was a gift. He took her hand, pressing it to his lips. Every tear, every exile, every long night apart, all were steps upon the same path that led me back to you. The soft murmur of the lake seemed to answer him. Across the water, the moon rose, vast and calm, painting the world in silver. Years passed thus, and though time touched them both, it did so with grace. Aldrich's hair grew white as frost, yet his eyes remained bright, steady beacons of devotion. Elowen's beauty, though softened by age, deepened into something radiant and serene, the kind of beauty that cannot fade because it lives not in youth, but in kindness. On the anniversary of their reunion, 10 years since his return, the people of Aramor gathered by the lake to honor their sovereigns. Lanterns floated upon the water, each carrying a whispered blessing, and the air filled with the sound of harps and soft song. Elowen stood before the crowd, her voice carrying gently across the stillness. "Peace," she said, "is not granted by kings or crowns. It blooms where love endures, where forgiveness takes root, and where hearts remember what it means to be human." A hush fell upon the crowd, broken only by the sigh of the wind through the reeds. Aldrich, standing beside her, felt pride and awe mingle with quiet joy. Later, when the music faded and the last lantern drifted out to sea, they lingered by the shore alone. "The world will forget our faces one day," Aldrich said softly. "Perhaps," Elowen replied, her fingers brushing his, "but not our love. The lake will remember, the willow will remember, and those who walk here after us will feel what we once felt, even if they know not why." He looked at her then, the moonlight catching in her hair. "Then that shall be enough." She smiled. More than enough. They stood together as night deepened, their reflections joining upon the surface of the lake, two souls at peace, their hearts still speaking in the quiet language that needed no words. When they returned to the castle, Aldrich paused at the tower door, the same one that had witnessed their first whispered vows. The candle still stood upon the sill, its wax new, its flame gentle. He turned to her, his voice barely above a breath. "I sometimes wonder if that candle burns for us, or if we now burn for it." Elowen's eyes glistened with fondness. "It burns for love, my dearest knight, and we are its keepers." And as they climbed the spiral stair once more, the old stones seemed to hum with memory, as though the tower itself knew it sheltered not merely rulers, but the living echo of a story written in starlight and kept alive by every soft breath of love. Autumn came once more to Aramor, soft and golden. The leaves turned to flame upon the hillsides, the air grew cool and sweet with wood smoke, and the songs of harvest filled the valleys. In every village square, laughter echoed. In every cottage window, candlelight flickered against the coming dusk. Peace had settled upon the realm like a warm cloak, steady, comforting, and whole. Aldrich and Eloin now walked more slowly through the gardens, yet their steps remained in harmony, as if time itself matched its pace to theirs. The queen's hair, touched by silver, shone softly beneath her crown, while Aldrich's hand, scarred, strong, and kind, rested often upon hers. They spoke little of duty these days, for their hearts had learned the art of silence, that language of love which needs no sound. Each evening, they met by the willow, the same tree that had watched them grow from secrecy to peace. Its branches, heavy with age, hung low enough to brush the water, whispering to the lake of all it had seen. Sometimes they would bring a loaf of bread and a flask of wine, sitting on the grass as twilight deepened. "Do you remember?" Eloin said one evening, her eyes fixed upon the fading sky. "How I once feared the passing of years? I thought love might weaken as the seasons turned." Aldrich smiled faintly. "And now? Now I see that love is the one thing time cannot erode. It grows gentler, perhaps, quieter, but stronger than before, like roots that reach deeper even as the branches fade." He reached for her hand. "Then we are two trees entwined, my heart. Whatever wind comes, we shall not fall." They sat in comfortable silence as the first stars began to shine above the still waters. From the castle came the distant murmur of music, the sound of young voices singing old songs, the same melodies they had once danced to in their youth. Eloin closed her eyes, letting the sound drift over her. "It feels as though the world is remembering for us now," she said softly. Aldrich looked at her, his expression tender. "And so it should. We have given our lives to its peace. Let the world carry the song onward." The days grew shorter, the air turned crisp, and mists rolled in from the river, curling around the castle walls. With each dawn, the sun rose lower, its light golden and gentle, like a farewell blessing. One morning, Eloin woke before the bells and stood at her window. The land below shimmered with frost, each blade of grass tipped with light. She pressed a hand to the glass, feeling the faint chill, and thought of all that had come before: the fear, the exile, the return, the long, tender years of quiet joy. Behind her, Aldrich stirred. "You're awake early, my queen." She turned, smiling softly. "I could not sleep. The dawn seemed to call." He rose, wrapping his cloak around her shoulders. "Then let us answer." They descended the tower stairs hand in hand, stepping out into the courtyard just as the sun crested the hills. The light bathed the world in hues of rose and amber. The villagers were already at work, drawing water, tending fires, gathering kindling. When they saw their queen and her knight walking among them, they bowed, not out of formality, but affection. A small child ran up and offered Eloin a white flower, freshly plucked. She knelt to accept it, her eyes bright with gratitude. "Thank you, little one," she said. "You have given me the morning's first joy." The child beamed and darted away, her laughter echoing like birdsong. Aldrich watched her fondly. "You see? Even the smallest hearts remember kindness." Eloin nodded. "It is the kingdom's true treasure." They lingered among the people for a while, listening to their stories, of new births, of good harvests, of simple hopes. Each tale was a thread in the tapestry of peace they had helped to weave, and hearing them filled their hearts with quiet pride. That evening, back in the great hall, they sat by the hearth while a young minstrel played a soft, lilting melody upon the lute. The tune was one Aldrich recognized, the same song he had played under distant stars during his exile. Eloin met his gaze, her smile wistful. "It seems even your music found its way home before you did." He chuckled lowly. "Perhaps it always knew the path better than I." The minstrel's song faded into silence, leaving only the crackle of the fire. Outside, snow began to fall, light as feathers, slow as dreams. Eloin leaned closer, her head resting against his shoulder. "If this is to be the winter of our lives," she whispered, "then let it be mild and full of light." Aldrich brushed his thumb along her hand. Every winter brings spring again, my love. But even if ours should not, we have already known the bloom. They watched the fire burn low, its embers glowing like tiny hearts, steady, warm, unafraid of the dark. And in that quiet hour, as snow whispered upon the windows, the world outside seemed to hold its breath, as if honoring two souls whose love had outlasted storm and time alike. Winter deepened its hold upon Aramor. The rivers froze, the towers wore crowns of frost, and the air rang with the quiet beauty of stillness. Snow lay heavy upon the old willow by the lake, its silver branches bending low beneath the weight. The whole world seemed wrapped in a serene hush, a season of reflection, of peace, after long years of love and labor. In the royal chambers, a soft fire glowed. The queen sat beside it, wrapped in furs, her eyes fixed on the dancing flames. Her hair, silver as moonlight, fell loose about her shoulders, and in her lap lay a small wooden box, old, worn smooth by time. Aldrich entered quietly. "I wondered where you'd gone." Elowen smiled faintly. "I was visiting our yesterdays." She opened the box to reveal what it held. A dried rose, its petals pale with age. A ribbon once tied around a scroll of secret letters. A fragment of parchment with a single line in his hand. "Wherever you are, my heart is bound." He knelt beside her, his eyes soft. "You kept them all." "I could not let them go," she said gently. "They are the roots of who we became." He reached for her hand, feeling how fragile it had grown. But her grip, though light, still carried the same strength that had once defied kingdoms. "You are always the heart of this realm, Elowen," he murmured, "and of mine." She looked into his eyes, a slow smile blooming. "And you were its soul." A log cracked in the fire, sending a flurry of golden sparks into the air. Outside, snow pressed against the windows like soft white hands. The candlelight shimmered, bathing the room in a tender warmth that felt timeless. Elowen's voice grew quieter. "Aldrich, promise me something, anything. When I am gone, do not mourn too deeply. Go to the lake, light a lantern, and let it drift upon the water. Do not weep, just whisper to the wind, and I will hear." He closed his eyes for a long moment, the weight of her words settling deep within him. "Do not speak of leaving, my love," he said, his voice low. "We have weathered every season together. Let us not part at the last." She reached up, brushing her fingers along his cheek. "Even the moon must yield to dawn, beloved. But the night remembers its light." Tears rose unbidden in his eyes, but she smiled, serene as the winter stars. "Hush," she whispered. "No sorrow tonight. Sit with me, as you did in the tower long ago. Tell me the story of how we first met, just once more." He obeyed, his voice trembling but warm. "You stood upon the balcony in your father's hall, watching the rain. I was but a guard below, soaked through, thinking only of the storm. And then I saw you, not as a princess, but as the calm within all that thunder." She laughed softly, the sound faint but musical. "And I thought you too proud to look up. I dared not," he said, smiling through tears, "for I feared the heavens might strike me down for loving you." Her eyes glistened. "And yet you did love me, through fear, through distance, through years, always." The fire dimmed, settling into quiet embers. The candle beside them flickered low. Elowen leaned her head upon his shoulder, her breath slow and even. "I am not afraid," she murmured, "for I go where love does not end." Aldrich held her close, feeling the rhythm of her heart, steady, fading, then still. The silence that followed was sacred. The snow outside seemed to stop falling for a moment, the very air holding its breath. Aldrich pressed a trembling kiss to her hair. "Rest, my queen," he whispered. "You have given light enough for 1,000 dawns." He sat beside her for hours, until the first pale rays of morning touched the frost upon the window. Then he rose, wrapping her in her favorite cloak, the one embroidered with silver leaves, and carried her to the old willow by the lake. The people gathered there, silent, their faces lit by the soft glow of hundreds of candles, As dawn rose over the frozen water, Aldrich placed a single white rose in her hands and whispered, "Sleep now, my heart. I will not be far behind." The bells tolled slowly across the land, their sound gentle as a lullaby, and from every tower, every cottage, every field, the people of Aramor bowed their heads, not in grief, but in reverence. For their queen had been loved, and her love had healed them all. That night, Aldrich stood by the lake as the moon rose high. He lit a lantern just as she had asked, and set it adrift upon the glassy surface. It glowed softly, drifting outward, joining the reflection of stars. He watched it until it vanished into the mist, his voice barely a breath. "Wherever you are, my heart is bound." Then he turned back toward the castle, older, lonelier, but carrying peace within his soul. For even in her absence, Elowen's light endured, woven into every shadow, every sigh of wind, every whisper of love beneath the old stone tower. Years passed like falling petals upon still water. Aramor remained a kingdom of peace, not through might but through memory. The songs of the people still spoke of Queen Elowen and her knight, of love that outlasted grief and lit the darkest nights with quiet devotion. Aldrich lived on within the castle walls, his days slow but filled with meaning. The duties of command were long since passed to younger hands. He now walked the gardens, tended the horses, and spoke kindly with the children of the court, who adored his gentle tales of the past. They called him the Silver Knight now, for his hair shone white as snow, and his armor hung quietly upon its stand, no longer worn but lovingly polished each week, as one might tend a memory. Every evening, when the bells tolled for vespers, he made his way to the lake. The willow still stood, though age had hollowed its trunk and bent its boughs toward the water as if in endless prayer. Beneath it, a small stone rested, carved with words in the old tongue. Love is not bound by breath or bone, but by the quiet song that never fades. There he would sit until moonrise, sometimes speaking softly as though she were beside him. The guards, passing by, learned to leave him in peace. They said the lake grew brighter on those nights, as though lit from within by her unseen presence. One evening, as winter loosened its hold and the first promise of spring shimmered in the air, Aldrich brought his lute, the same one he had carried through exile and battle and love. Its strings were old, its wood darkened with age, yet when he plucked a chord, the sound was pure as ever. He played her song, the melody he had once written beneath the silver moon. His voice, though frail, carried warmth still. "Beneath the moon, my heart shall stay, where your soft breath once led the way. And though the stars may fade and fall, my love will find you, through it all." When the final note faded, he lifted his gaze to the sky. The moon hung full and bright above the water, and for a moment, just a moment, he thought he saw her reflection there, standing among the reeds, her gown pale as mist, her smile tender as the dawn. He rose slowly, his heart calm, not startled but serene. "Elowen," he whispered, and the name passed through the air like a sigh of peace. She seemed to beckon, her form luminous, her eyes filled with that same light he had loved all his life, the light that forgave, that comforted, that never once turned away. Aldrich felt no fear, no ache, only warmth, only the deep knowing that his journey, long and faithful, was nearing its rightful rest. He walked toward the lake. The water glowed beneath his feet, as if the stars themselves had come to bear him up. Each step was lighter than the last, until he stood upon the edge of the reflection, and the world seemed to hush. In the morning, the guards found his cloak folded neatly by the willow's roots, his lute resting beside it. The surface of the lake was undisturbed, save for a single white flower drifting upon it, one that had not grown there in many winters. And so it was said that the knight had gone to join his queen, that love had bridged the final distance between earth and heaven. From that day on, no one saw the willow without thinking it whispered softly to the lake, and no one heard the wind without believing it carried a lover's vow. The people of Aramor built a small shrine near the water's edge, not of gold or marble, but of stone and ivy. Travelers came from far lands to sit beneath the willow and rest in its shadow, saying they felt peace there, a peace that lingered long after they left. And when the moon rose full, the lake shimmered with a faint silver glow, as if two souls walked still along its edge, hand in hand, whispering words too gentle for mortal ears. Generations turned like pages in a great, illuminated book. Seasons changed, kings rose and fell, and still the story of the queen and her knight lived on, whispered by mothers to children before sleep, sung softly by minstrels on moonlit roads. The kingdom of Aramor prospered, not through conquest, but through the quiet legacy of compassion they had left behind. The great hall bore no portraits of war, no trophies of might, only a mural of a lake beneath a silver moon, with two figures standing hand in hand beneath a weeping willow. In the castle archives, scholars spoke often of Queen Eloin's wisdom, how she ruled with heart before crown, how she forgave where others would have punished, how her reign had been marked not by fear, but by gentleness. They wrote of her knight, Sir Aldrich, the man who taught that courage is born not from anger, but from love. But it was in the hearts of the people, not in parchment or paint, that their memory truly lived. On quiet nights, villagers still came to the lake. Lovers sat beneath the willow, speaking vows in low voices, believing that the spirits of the queen and her knight blessed every promise made there. The old said the water glowed faintly whenever true words of love were spoken. A soft shimmer, like moonlight caught in motion. Children played nearby, throwing pebbles that rippled the reflections, laughing as if they heard music in the air. And sometimes, when the wind was still, a lute's distant note seemed to rise across the water, a single lingering sound that faded as gently as a dream. One spring, a wandering bard arrived from the southern lands. He was young and curious, carrying a harp upon his back and songs from 100 roads. When he heard of the tale of the queen and her knight, he lingered by the lake for many nights, trying to capture in melody what words alone could not hold. He wrote of love that defied exile, of patience stronger than time, of a kingdom healed not by blade or crown, but by two hearts that chose peace over pride. He named his song The Whispers of Love in the old stone tower, and when he sang it before the people of Aramor, they wept, not from sorrow but from the deep soothing ache of beauty remembered. In that moment, the bard felt the air stir. A breeze brushed the strings of his harp though he had ceased to play. The willow's branches swayed though the night was calm, and in the reflection of the lake, for the briefest heartbeat, he saw two shapes walking side by side, pale as moonlight, calm as eternity. He bowed his head, understanding without words. Love had not perished, it had simply changed its form. From that day on, the bard's song spread across kingdoms and ages. Sailors hummed it beneath distant stars. Hermits carved its lines into stones beside their caves. Queens and peasants alike found solace in its verses, for in a world so often shadowed by strife, it reminded all who heard it that gentleness was its own kind of strength, and love its own kind of immortality. Centuries later, when the towers of Aramor had become ivy-clad ruins and the forest had crept closer to the lake, travelers still found the place. The willow yet stood, its boughs silvered by age, its roots deep in memory. The air was always calm there, the water always still, and at night, when the moon rose high, one could swear they heard soft voices, a woman's laughter, a man's reply, the faintest echo of footsteps on grass. Some said it was imagination, others said it was love, too gentle to die. Those who slept by the lakeshore spoke of dreams, of candlelight and rain against stone, of whispered vows in the old tower, of two figures embracing beneath a sky filled with stars. They always woke with peace in their hearts, as though touched by something holy and kind. And so, the tale became not just a story, but a lullaby to the world, a song carried in blood and memory, reminding every heart that listened of what endures when all else fades. In the final image, the lake lies quiet beneath the moon, The willow bows low, and upon the silver surface, two reflections shimmer faintly, hand in hand, eternal. The wind moves softly through the grass, whispering their names, and the night answers with the calm sigh of forever, for love, once born of truth, cannot die. It only changes shape, into light, into memory, into the hush that comes when hearts finally rest. And thus ends the tale of the knight and his queen. Their whispers still carried through every dream. Beneath the everlasting moon, centuries drifted by like feathers upon the breath of the wind. The old kingdom of Aramor, once crowned in banners and bells, had grown quiet with time. Forests reclaimed the edges of the land. Ivy climbed the walls of forgotten towers, and wildflowers bloomed where knights had once trained in shining armor. Yet among the ruins, the story of the queen and her knight endured, unbroken, unforgotten, as if the very stones themselves still whispered their names. Travelers who wandered into those woods often spoke of a strange tranquility there, an air so calm that even the birds sang softer. The ruins of the castle, though worn by age, still carried grace. The great hall's archways stood half-buried in moss, but the lake beside it remained untouched, still reflecting the moon as it had since their time. And always, the willow bent low, its branches silvered with age, trailing across the water like the fingertips of a dream. Villages had risen and fallen beyond those borders. New kingdoms had been born. Yet, no mapmaker ever dared erase the name Aramor Lake from their charts. Pilgrims came from far places, not for gold or relics, but for peace. They said if one knelt beside the water and whispered a name dear to their heart, the ripples would shimmer in answer, and their burdens would feel lighter when they rose again. Among those who came was a young woman named Mayra, a scholar from the southern coast. She had heard tales of the Silver Knight and the Queen of the Willow, how their love had healed a land and defied all sorrow. Her own heart, wearied by a world that had forgotten gentleness, longed to understand the truth behind the legend. She arrived at dusk, when the forest glowed with the last light of day. Her cloak was travel-worn, her satchel filled with parchment and ink. Yet when she reached the lake, all her words seemed small before its silence. The air smelled of rain and earth. The willow swayed as though greeting her. Mara set up her small camp by the shore, kindling a quiet fire. As night fell, the moon rose, vast and silver, and she opened her journal. "I seek not proof," she wrote, "but presence, the echo of a love that time could not erase." The water rippled faintly as if in reply. She stayed for many days, exploring the ruins, tracing her fingers along the carvings of ancient stones. She found fragments of old songs etched faintly into the tower walls, verses of devotion, of faith, of peace. One line caught her breath. "When hearts are kind, time kneels before them." Mara copied the words carefully, feeling something stir within her. Not the excitement of discovery, but the tenderness of being understood by those long gone. Each evening, she returned to the lake. Sometimes she would sing softly, old melodies passed through generations. Other times, she simply sat and listened, to the wind, to the water, to the quiet feeling that someone unseen was listening too. On the seventh night, a mist rolled over the lake, silver and fine as silk. The air shimmered faintly, and for the briefest heartbeat, Mara thought she saw movement, two faint shapes upon the far side of the water, walking slowly beneath the willow's boughs. She did not cry out. She only bowed her head, her heart filled with calm. "You are remembered," she whispered, "not as rulers, but as love itself." The shapes glimmered once, like starlight caught upon glass, then faded. The mist thinned, leaving the lake clear and still once more. When morning came, Mara gathered her notes and prepared to leave. Before she did, she took a small stone from the shore and carved a simple line into it with her knife. "They walked so we might rest." She set it beneath the willow, among others left by travelers over the centuries, stones bearing words of gratitude, hope, and peace. When she returned home to her coastal city, Mara wrote a book, The Whispering Lake, a chronicle of enduring love. It was unlike any history written before it. She spoke not of battles or treaties, but of compassion, of patience, of how a single love story had rippled through generations to soften hearts and temper pride. Her book spread like gentle fire through the lands. Monks copied it in candlelight. Storytellers wove its verses into song. Couples began to wed beneath moonlight, exchanging vows that ended not with "till death do us part," but till time forgets our names. And still, in quiet corners of the world, people dreamed of Aramor, a place they had never seen, but somehow remembered. For though the towers had fallen, and the kingdom's banners turned to dust, the spirit of its queen and knight lived on, in every kind hand, in every act of mercy, in every soul that believed love to be the greatest power ever known. Mara's book traveled far beyond her own time. The centuries that followed carried her words through kingdoms and empires yet unborn. Kings read them in their youth and learned gentleness where they might have sought power. Poets found in them the spark for verses that soothed nations. And among the common folk, the Whispering Lake became a prayer, a promise that even in the hardest of lives, love was a light that no darkness could quench. Temples rose in distant valleys, each crowned with a carving of a willow bowing to the moon. Pilgrims carried small glass vials filled with water from Aramor's lake, believing it to bless their homes with peace. Lovers, when they parted, pressed such vials into each other's hands, saying softly, "Until the lake stirs again." The story wove itself so deeply into the hearts of people that no historian could ever unmake it. What had begun as truth became legend, and what was legend became faith, and perhaps that was the truest immortality of all. Long after Mara was gone, her own descendants returned to the lake, guided by her writings. Among them was a boy named Erend, no older than 15, quiet-eyed and thoughtful. He had grown up hearing the tale of the knight and queen not as fantasy, but as family, the story that had given his great ancestor her life's purpose. One spring night, drawn by a pull he could not name, he walked alone to the water's edge. The air was fragrant with the scent of new blossoms, and the willow shimmered in the starlight. He sat upon the same stone where Mara's carving had faded with years of rain, and he whispered into the stillness, "Are you still here?" For a long while there was no sound but the soft murmur of frogs in the reeds. Then a ripple passed across the lake, small, then larger, until the moonlight broke upon it like glass. Erend felt his heart slow, his breath deepen. He did not see faces or forms, only light, gentle, endless, warm. It moved across the lake like a tide of calm, touching the willow, the shore, the very air. And within that light, he heard a voice, not loud, not near, but deep inside him. "Love does not fade, child. It changes shape and flows through those who believe." He closed his eyes, and in that moment, he understood. The knight and the queen were not spirits bound to the lake. They were the breath of kindness that moved through every age, the calm that followed every storm, the unseen hands that guided hearts toward peace. When the light faded, the night was quiet again, but Aaron's heart burned with new purpose. He gathered his quills and ink and began to write by moonlight, his words simple yet radiant. They were not gods, nor saints, nor myths. They were love made living, and love, once born, needs only memory to live forever. His writings, humble though they were, traveled swiftly. They rekindled the tale in every corner of the world. Painters began to depict not two rulers, but two souls beneath a moonlit willow, eternal symbols of patience, devotion, and grace. Musicians turned the story into soft ballads played in quiet inns, where tired travelers found rest listening to the melody. Even the weary and faithless, hearing of the knight and queen, felt something loosen in their hearts, as if the world, for a moment, remembered its gentleness. And so, Aramor, though lost to time, became a name that lived wherever peace was found. The lake became legend, the willow became prayer, and the love that had begun in an old stone tower beneath a silver moon became a part of humanity's very breath. Centuries later, when no one remembered Mayra or Erend by name, a young minstrel would still lift her voice beneath a foreign sky and sing. Once they walked where fireflies gleamed, their hearts the bridge twixt dark and dream, and though the tower's stones have died, their whispers bloom on every tide. The song would drift into the night, carried by wind and water alike, and somewhere beyond the veil of time, two souls would hear it and smile. Beneath an eternal moon, upon a lake that never truly froze nor faded, the knight and queen still walked. They spoke not in words but in light. Their hands touched, and the stars above them rippled like silver leaves. They looked down upon the world that had grown from their love, a world gentler than the one they had left behind. And in that quiet eternity, Aldrich turned to Eowyn and said, in the voice of wind through willow, "See how they remember my heart. We are the story they tell to find peace." Eowyn smiled, her eyes aglow with starlight. "Then let us keep watch, forever their whisper, forever their calm." And so they did. Their love, no longer bound by stone or time, became the hush that falls before dawn, the silver light upon the water, the warmth in every vow softly spoken beneath the moon. They were no longer simply the knight and the queen. They were the quiet truth behind every story of love that endures, the eternal guardians of the dream that even death cannot dim. Thus ends Whispers of Love in the Old Stone Tower, a tale not of endings, but of echoes, where love became the moonlight that never leaves the water, and peace became the song that never ceases to be sung.